August 6, 2022. I haven't discussed the Ukraine situation in my videos for some time, so I thought I'd get into it for a little change of pace here as we have been dealing with various domestic issues here in the previous few videos. Yeah, basically, as I've said the last video on Ukraine I did, there was, I thought the situation had become pretty much a stalemate or static situation. With the Russians maintaining maybe some gradual progress. Recent developments are kind of interesting. There's been a lot of discussion about a Ukrainian counteroffensive, and it apparently has started a little bit, but it doesn't seem to have made that much of an advance. The idea was to take back Kherson, I think was at least what was being discussed publicly. Of course, the question is, if you're really going to do this, do you actually publicly say that's what you're going to do as a military strategy, or do you attack on a different front? But it appears that there was attacks in that area, and they used their American-supplied HIMARS precision rocket system to knock out a key bridge that connects the Crimea to that area of Ukraine. And so, but it seems like not to the greatest avail, because all that bridge is unusable. They apparently are using pontoon-type bridges and barges to get supplies across, so it continues. And it doesn't seem like there's been any major advance. You know, Kherson was an interesting city, and whereas some of the cities in Ukraine were kind of prepared as fortress cities, where the Ukrainian were going to do some in-depth resistance fighting, such as Kharkiv and Mariupol, which and Kharkiv held out pretty well, and Mariupol was apparently pretty much reduced to rubble, and the Russians eventually took it. And in fact, something related to Mariupol will be later in this video, but having to do with a alleged war crime. But at any rate, the situation looks maybe will become more of the Ukrainian movement, because forces have been concentrated in that southern region. However, it appears the Russians on other fronts are moving forward as well, and are attempting various maneuvers that might cause the Ukrainians to abort their attack. So we'll just have to wait and see how that comes. By the way, if you like these videos, again, please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have, give me a like if you like these videos. And, of course, comments are appreciated. Yeah, and I just want to get into this here. We have a situation that maybe the Russians are up to something, because apparently in many of these fronts, a lot of the Russian units have apparently disappeared, according to some reports I've read. And I can put a link to a more in-depth video if you want to go through the really blow-by-blow military stuff in it. Essentially, it looks like what they're doing is pulling Russian units out of the front and replacing them with some of the military units recruited from the breakaway regions in Donbass. You know, there's these two breakaway people's republics, in quotes, self-proclaimed, that exist in those areas. And anyhow, their militias, or whatever you want to call them, are actually on the front line now. And the Russian troops apparently have gone back into home and are refitting. Plus, they're also recruiting new so-called volunteer units that are being formed and trained to beef up the Russian army. And there's one other thing that could be a really ominous development for the Ukrainian side. There's a rumor out that I've seen on YouTube that from I think it's an Indian site called Crux, that there's a deal in works between Russia and North Korea. And of course, you know, North Korea is always looking for support from outside, and apparently Russia's prepared to provide them with energy resources and maybe food resources or something of that sort, in return for, get this, 100,000 North Korean troops. And since North Korea has an army that has a lot of infantry in it, and the weakness of the Russian military clearly is a lack of good infantry, bring in 100,000 North Korean infantrymen into this fight would be a real major power balance shift in the favor of the Russians. So this is something to watch out for, I think, if it really develops. I would put that in the maybe category at this point. So if it doesn't happen, don't say I promised it was happening, or I'm just saying that this is being discussed, and it makes some sense. I mean, North Korea has a lot of troops, and they definitely need supplies. They're under all kinds of embargoes and sanctions. So two sanctioned countries can work together for a common purpose. And historically, North Korea has been more in the Russian sphere of influence for many decades than it was in the Chinese sphere. So, interestingly enough, so that's a possibility. Now I want to get to another subject here, which is kind of interesting, and it also involves some of these systems. There's I pronounce it. There's a prison in which some of the people that surrendered from the Battle of Mariupol, the Azov Battalion folks, Olenivka, I think it is. I may be mispronouncing. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. So I certainly don't know a Russian or Ukrainian. So at any rate, it's in one of these breakaway, self-proclaimed, areas that are in rebellion, right? It's a town there. There's a prison there, which apparently was probably a prison pre-war, but it's being used to house POWs that the Russians have captured from the surrender of Mariupol. Well, about a week or so ago, I guess it was, the exact date eludes me, it was blown up with some sort of an artillery attack or perhaps rocket attack, and apparently in the middle of the night, like around 2 a.m. And like roughly 50 of these POWs were killed, and horribly in bed, basically, when the bombardment came in. And it was first being, heard in the Western, media that this was a Russian war crime, and that somehow the Russians had shelled their own prison. But it's behind Russian lines, so it doesn't fit into the area of an accidental bombardment. I mean, why would you? I mean, you can see when you're around the front line that you can easily have a miscoordination, and artillery might be directed at the wrong target. But in that sense, but behind their lines at a POW camp that they were staffing doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And that was my first thought. This sounds suspicious. Now, the Russian version, which I've now been able to find on the internet, is just the opposite. That they're claiming that in fact it was bombed by the Ukrainians. And specifically, they're saying it was hit with the HIMARS rocket system, which is precise GPS-guided rockets and hit over 70 kilometers away, very powerful weapons. And it was totally wrecked, killed like 50 of their own POWs, if that's the case. And so this is very suspicious, and both sides have called for the UN to investigate the situation and to determine what happened. But so far, I don't think the UN inspectors have been allowed to have access yet. So we don't know what's going on here for sure. But it just doesn't make sense to me, even though I'm fully prepared to believe the Russians are fully capable of committing an atrocity, of course. They've committed plenty in this war so far, haven't they? But they bombed their own POW camp with artillery or rocket fire. It just doesn't make too much sense. And so the Ukrainians did it, and so the Russians are trying to claim that the Ukrainians did it deliberately because to send a message to our soldiers not to surrender. Sounds like propaganda, doesn't it? And I guess the Ukrainians would claim they did it just as an atrocity. Well, another possibility occurs to me is that there have been many instances in which Russian generals or command staff or headquarters have been taken out by precision strikes, probably provided by intelligence, probably from NATO, probably the United States when they come down to it, right? Which has the best intelligence services in the world and capabilities in terms of at least signal intelligence and photo intelligence and all that stuff. Radar, So what I'm thinking is it would kind of behoove the Russians to somehow spoof the Ukrainians into accidentally blowing up a target that would be painful for the Ukrainians to have destroyed. Something involving civilians or, in this case, POWs. And now it kind of then makes it a little bit more wary of, do they really want to just take any of these, launch these attacks? This is just a little conjecture on my part, what could have happened. That the Russians could have let them think that this was where our headquarters was located, or some senior general staff was located or something like that, and put that out in a open communication. It would be obviously intercepted, and they, using a precise targeting, attacked it and killed a bunch of their own guys. This is a guess, but it could have been an induced attack by the Russians, because it doesn't. I don't really buy the theory that they'd kill their own POWs just to induce people not to surrender. I mean, that seems a little too sinister, perhaps, for the Ukrainians. I mean, the Ukrainians, I've always pointed out, aren't as clean as they're being presented in Western media, but then again, they're not totally sinister either. And the Russians, I could see, really would be interested in spoofing them into making a mistake like this, because then that would maybe give more protection to their own headquarters and generals. Anyway, just a thought. But at any rate, it is being claimed to be a war crime by both sides, and the UN probably will eventually be given access to investigate. If it really was done with HIMARS rockets, however, there should be evidence from the debris of the rockets, or if it's done with artillery, if it's done by Russian, that should be evidence there too. Of course, since it's behind their lines, if it doesn't, well, you can see that there could either be planting of evidence or sanitizing of sites. So it goes. At any rate, the war rages on, and no peace in sight. Well, anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. And like I say, you can follow me on my social media accounts, addresses of which are in the description below. And I'll put a link to a more detailed description, which I think is kind of a guy from History Legends, who does, I think, some pretty good critical analysis that doesn't quite match what either side is saying, but tries to, I think, be sort of objective on what's actually happening there. I'll put a link to that below. And until next time.